and I always love breaking out my Vectrex to play it. And going to the Midwest Gaming Classic this year, I picked up the overlays for this thing, and having a little difficulty putting this sucker in, but it gave me another chance to break this sucker out and play it, and to share a little bit about what overlays are and what the Vectrex is itself. So let's wipe off the dust of the Vectrex and give it a look. A few years back, I decided I wanted to get a Vectrex again. I let one go a long time ago, and I really wanted to have one in my collection so I could play it. It's not the same playing it on emulation. I love to play on the real hardware. So, you know, for something like that, I really wanted to get another Vectrex, and I always regretted letting it go. So at the convention, I waited till day 3. There was one left on the table, and I walked by that vendor, went down about 3 booths down looking at stuff just to see if there's anything else I could buy. And I just said, you know, I'd rather just get this Vectrex in my collection again. And I turned around, hightailed it back to the table, and it was freaking gone, man. It was gone. I was so mad, but now I had something to do next year. So that following year, as soon as they opened the doors, I beelined it right to that table, picked up a Vectrex right away, did a little bit shopping for the hour that we get early entry for the VIGs, and then went and stuck that heavy beast back up in my hotel room because I'm not going to lug that around all day. And I got a Vectrex back in my collection. I went down, I bought a controller, and I bought a multi-cart and a couple games for it. And I was really excited about having this back into my game collection once again. And something told me I needed to go down and get those overlays, because all the loose games I was buying didn't have the overlays, and I really wanted the overlays. And once you spend north of $600 on, you know, the system and a few games and a controller, you know, you just you don't want to spend $250 on overlays. So I didn't buy them. So this year when I went back, I got the pack of 27 overlays for $250. And I was really excited about getting them. And they all come in these white envelopes. And first thing was first is you don't know what the heck's in these white envelopes. So I took the time to label all these suckers up and get all the games names right on them. So that was the first thing I did before I cracked this video and started playing my Vectrex. So what an overlay is vector graphics back then, you know, for the rudimentary ones, for the first ones that came out, were just black and white. So it just drew a white line on the screen. So to get any color, you'd put a translucent overlay on front of the screen, and you would clip it in the bottom, clip it in the top, and it would just sit in there, and that would be your screen. And a lot of, you know, a lot of video games in the arcades use this type of overlay, you know, when it came to video games, you know, whether it be adding color or adding a bezel around it, they would use overlays, and it kind of gives the game a little character. You know, you got each individual logo is going to be on the bottom, and then you're going to have all the, you know, button, you know, what the functions, what they do, whether it be, you know, thrust, fire, or escape, which is kind of like the hyper thing. What Mindstorm is the pack-in game that's automatically built into it, and it's asteroids. It's pretty much asteroids, you know, and their version of it. So it added its own flavor to it. So I had to get this, man. I just really wanted to get all these overlays, and it would have been easy for me just to go online, order it, and get it sent to the house. But I like to find these things in the wild, and I like to get these things from the vendor himself and build those relationships. So I waited a whole year, and now I have them in my collection. And this came out in 1982, and it was brought to you by Milton Bradley and GCE. And you didn't have to tie down the family's television set. You could actually, play on its own, video screen that it came with. And it actually had an analog joystick and 4 arcade-style buttons that made it feel like its own arcade cabinet. And that buzzing noise that you hear is actually the Vectrex. It actually buzzes quite a bit drawing these graphics on the screen, and it's really old technology, but using these overlays that came with every flipping game would make it its own individual arcade game right there in your very own home. And there's going to be pros and cons with a system like this, and it's going to differ for everybody. But a big con was, this was in 1982. This was 1 year before the big video game crash. And in 1982, this came out for $199. And when you calculate the inflation rate, that's a price of a PS5 nowadays. And people were not willing to buy, a video game system after a video game system, especially if it was 2 or 3 years after the last one came out. And it's not uncommon for us to buy new cell phones for our kids that are 8 and 10 years old and spend $1,000 on them now. And people just were not purchasing these units for their kids back then. They were not selling off the shelves. And 1 year later, you could find these for $49.99. And the same year that this came out, the Atari 5200 came out, and the ColecoVision came out with more of a arcade style graphics, and people didn't want to go back to vector graphics at this time, especially when there was just black and white. And if you went and asked my 12-year-old self, I would have wanted the 5200 or the ColecoVision, because every time I went to Sears at Southridge Mall in Des Moines, Iowa, I ran straight back to the video games to actually see if I get a chance to play Donkey Kong on the ColecoVision. In fact, I can't even remember ever seeing a kiosk or a Vectrex. And even though this is 44 years old, when I fire this sucker up, and I know the camera's not going to capture how vibrant this is because of the refresh rates of the camera, but this thing looks gorgeous. It looks just as it did, 44 years ago. And in 1983, when the video game crash came and the price dropped down to $49.99, parents really lost their trust into video game consoles, and they were not buying anything until 1984 or 1985, when the Famicom came out in Japan and the NES came out in North America. And at that point in time, we were playing with power, pun intended there, because we were gravitating towards more arcade style games that looked like things we were playing in the arcade. Super Mario, Zelda, Punch-Out, Duck Hunt had our attention at that time. And I would say if this thing came out in 1978 or 1979, you would have had a lot more games for the system, and it would have had a lot more popularity. Hope you guys like to look back at the Vectrex, man. I just love pulling that thing out of the game room. I only do it about 3 or 4 times a year. Maybe now that I got the overlays, maybe I'll do it, half a dozen times. If you guys haven't played one, I encourage you, get to a convention that has a gaming museum in it, jump on one and play it. You don't have to buy it. It's just something cool to actually sit down and play every once in a while. Hope you guys are all doing great out there. Remember, be kind to one another, and game on.